Hi, it's Mark, back with another Photoshop tutorial. I'm recording this one on the 26th of December. I did not really have to look at my calendar to tell me that. So I hope you all had a Merry Christmas, and how strange this will look if you're watching this in June or July. Anyway, today we're going to be looking at composites, and there's lots of resources out there, lots of videos about composites. But by and large, although they do good job looking at selection and blending of layers and such, which is all very important, they don't always concentrate on some of the other refinements which help in composites, such as matching the luminance, matching the colour, matching the saturation, matching the shadows, matching the perspective. All of those together go with good selections and all the other good stuff out there to make a composite. So whereas we're going to be doing composite today, it's more about breaking it down into these individual parts and looking at those as tools and techniques you can take away to apply all or some in your own work. So in a moment too, credits are going to come in from one of these directions. I will disappear from the screen, so there's a blessing. And on the other side of the credits, we'll get cracking. Welcome back, and well done in surviving the credits. So here we are in, I was going to say sunny Photoshop because I normally do, but it's kind of an overcast, cloudy Photoshop with a magnificent picture of this road going away to infinity. And we're going to be placing in that picture this young lady. So the obvious things to do are to cut the girl out and move her into this picture, which we'll do, and then placement. So let's crack on with that. I'm not going to spend too much time refining things. It can be very forgiving. You don't necessarily always have to be pinpoint accurate with everything. What I suggest we do is you crack on, seeing if it's going to work, seeing if your placement's right, seeing if your colours are right, and this, that, and the other. And because the big advantage of Photoshop is everything's on separate layers, you can always revisit the individual things. Okay, it's a bit like painting a wall. You paint most of the wall and then you take your time around the edges. Okay, if you started at the edges and took all sorts of time in doing it right, you'd never get it done, and you might not like the color at the end of painting the wall. So that's the philosophy here. Move on, big steps, see if it's going to work, see if you want to make some big changes or not, and then refine things. Hope that makes sense. Okay, let's get cracking with our first selection. So there's the picture I want to select. I'm going to press W to call up my quick selection tool, and it doesn't really matter which one of those is selected because we're not actually going to use it. We've called up a selection tool so that we can enable these two facilities in Photoshop. So I'm using Adobe Photoshop 2021 here. So I'll click Select Subject and let Adobe try and decide what the selection is. And on face value, that looks kind of okay. We'll have to zoom in a little bit to have a check. There are some hairs there. It hasn't quite done it in the crook of the arm. But let's click on Select and Mask. Now, which one of these overlay layers you prefer to use by all means. I prefer using this one, the overlay one, as opposed to necessarily that. I would use that one if I wanted to get really close in and do individual hairs and such, but we're just going to use this one for now. Feel free to do what you like. Before we make any adjustments on this, I'm just going to Command and plus to zoom in, or that's Control and plus if you're on a PC, and you can see how we've got some issues around there. Got something in the hair, a little bit untidy on the side of the arm. There's that bit in there to fix, and there's a gap in the boots, and the front of the boot there. Okay, so let's first thing we're going to do, I'm going to try this new feature, which is refine hair, and see what that does for us. Okay, so it's certainly done a better mask around the hair, but it's introduced a bit of issue in the hat, so you can see the faint red coming through there. We'll have to fix that, but you know what, I'm not precious. So let's click on this brush here, which is our refine edge brush, and I'm just going to dab on a few places. That didn't help at all in doing that. Notice how it brought a lot more other things out, so I'm going to Control Z on that, and I'll just fix that one by hand. As I say, don't sweat the small stuff, crack on, do this globally, really. Fix that one. Where else was the one? possibly there, no, just in there. See what the boot does, and in there. See, I don't really care if this is good or bad at this stage. It's just a rough selection to get me there, so I can kind of see what's what. And I'm going to say I'm happy with that for the moment. You can always go back and change things. So let's put that out to a new layer with a new mask and click OK. And as you can see, there are some issues there we need to tidy up, and it is a bit transparent there. So I'm just going to quickly do that now with a brush. I'll click on my mask. I'm going to B for brush tool. And yes, I could go back and refine my selections. Yes, I could do this in other ways, but you know what? I'm not precious. I want to have white. Just bring that back in there. Bring her shoulder back. We lost her shoulder before. Oops, my flow's down. I'll have to take my flow back up. You see that's bringing that back in, how we'd lost it before. And elements of the hat. And I'll click X to change my brush colour to black to hide these other bits. I'm just going to take these off. You, of course, as I say in all these videos, can spend as much time as you like, but I would still recommend sometimes you just go with being a bit brash at first, because you want to find out if it's actually going to look, is it going to be work? You might find that it totally doesn't for you, and that you waste far too much time trying to do it. Fail fast. There you go. I'm just going to say job's done on that one. So Control 0 to get us back. So we've got a girl. We've got her selected out. I'm going to click and drag that layer. Keep a hold of my mouse up to my other document. Keep a hold of my mouse. Bring it down. Leave go and drop it in place. Photoshop has decided to go away and think about things. I think my backup's actually just kicked in. So I'll just pause this video. Okay, we're back. Sorry about that. First thing I'm going to do as soon as I finish with this recording, though, is click that backup button again and get it to do that, because you are taking backups, aren't you? Regular, so you can always recover your data. Your data being the most valuable thing. Anyway, don't stop me on backups. Here you are. I left go of the mouse, and before Photoshop decided to pause on me, our girl is being dropped in place on the screen. And it doesn't look right straight away. And from now on, this is what we're going to be addressing. And the first thing I think I'll have a look at is perspective. So if I use my move tool, I can click V for my move tool, or I can just come up here and select my move tool. You can see the V is the shortcut. Incidentally, if you don't know your shortcuts and you want to learn them, so obviously B for brush, but if you didn't know and you click on brush, right click, and you get to see the B is in fact the thing. So I've got my move tool, and I'm going to move her around and see, find a place, and what works. Why doesn't that work, whereas that one does? And the reason for that is perspective. So one trick in lining perspective is to look and match horizon lines. Now, if you go back here to find where the horizon line is on this particular picture, we can press U for our shapes tool, and here they are. If I right click on there, you'll see the shapes tool. Last time I used this, it was on line, and line is what we want. So if you haven't already got line, pick line. And let's draw some leading lines to find out where our horizon line is, because it isn't necessarily obvious on this one. So I'm going to come down the triangle lines of these bushes. So click once and drag down the line of that bush, roughly down that one there. We did have what looked like a horizon being usually defined by sky meeting land or such, but there was there. But I think that these lines take this path coming up into the path. So I think the convergence point is there. So I think just under her left shoulder blouse is where the horizon line is. So just under there. Now where's the horizon line on this one? Well, if we did the line trick tool, you can see where it is anyway. Put another one in. It is actually on the horizon. That isn't always a given. Delete that, delete that. So let's go back to the move tool and let's put a shoulder there. So that's why that one worked better than that one, because we were matching the perspective. Now sometimes you don't have the ability to put guidelines in on the subject you're putting in. That might have been flat against a wall with no leading lines in to help you find the horizon, in which case it's intuitive. And I find if it's a person, as long as it's not an obscure camera angle like someone crouching down low shooting up at the model's face or something, if it's a person, generally it's around about chest to shoulder height, which is kind of roughly the line of sight of your camera when you pick up and shoot forward. So there we go. So I've matched perspective, I think. Now where we place her in the end result, I can always move around, but I think I've covered the point. So let's move on to the first thing I want to do, which is to match luminance. I say the first thing we're going to do, I didn't mean the first thing we're going to do. I've done the first thing. In fact, I've done the first two. We've done a cutout, we've done our placement. Ooh, there's a little line around my selection. I've just noticed that. So here's a trick for you. Once you've made a selection and you get a little bit of a halo, a lesser known filter. So we go to filter. I've selected my layer mask. Filter, we go to other and go to minimum. And I'm going to change it to the lowest value, which is, well, no, we'll go for almost a pixel. If I click OK, see that line reduced a little bit? Let's do that again, shall we? Filter, other, minimum, and let's make it a full pixel this time, and click OK. And that's reduced it quite a little bit more, so that's fine. Right, where was I? Yes, so we've done those things already, so now it's addressing colours and this, that, the other. So luminance. Now this is a bit of a different approach to doing luminance, and it involves a adjustment layer called threshold. So let's call that up and see what it does. So there's threshold. So that's interesting. What's going on here? Well, we're going to be introducing some layers which purely are guides for us, like checking layers. And then with the output of those layers, they will help us set luminance, saturation, colour. So in terms of threshold and luminance, this is great because this makes things black and white. There's no grey, there's no colour, there's nothing. It's black and white. Where's the dividing line? The dividing line is where you have this threshold set, this level. If I move it here, I'm now saying, look at this picture, and everything to the left of this level make black, and everything to the right of the level make white. And if I move it to the other direction, of course this is reversing things. I'm now saying everything to the left black and everything to the right white, but because I've moved the threshold, you can see the effect that's having on the picture. Now I'm going to stick it about there, about 40, 42, something like that, because I think in this picture, obviously the road and the telegraph pole and such were quite dark, but look how far more contrasting elements of the hat, raiment, such are. I think her blacks, if I switch that off, I think her blacks are too black compared to the other things, possibly a telegraph pole and a little bit on these sticks, but I think we need to bring that down. And that indeed is what is helping us see here with applying the threshold. So let's go to our, I'm going to call this girl. Let's go to our girl and apply a levels adjustment layer. And whatever we do with the levels adjustment layer, I only want it to apply to the girl layer, not the background. So I'm going to clip with that little icon there onto it. So everything we do now in this levels adjustment layer, and we're doing this for luminance, so I'm going to call it that. Everything we do in this levels adjustment layer will only impact the girl. So what we want to do now is make those blacks less black. How do you do that? Well, the easiest way to do that is on the output sliders here. This changes the black point from pure black to say, you know what, let's just move it up a bit. And you can see already the effect that's having on the blacks. They're not as black. And I think there kind of matches what we're seeing on the general blacks and how much is creeping in and how much isn't. So I'm quite happy with that, I think. Well, let's have a look. I'm going to switch the threshold layer off and on and off. You can see the effect that's had so far. But I didn't necessarily want it on our trousers, but we'll come back to that in a second. Go back to thresholds and let's do the other side of that coin, shall we? Let's move the thresholds up. Now the brightest thing we have is the sky. She's facing the sky. Her hat, albeit is entitled to be very bright, should not really be brighter than that sky, unless we're adding some light of ourselves. And again, down our arm here. So we've used the thresholds now to kind of have a look at the lights. Let's go back to our luminance levels adjustment and do the opposites here. So we're reducing the white point into about there, I think. And then switch the threshold off. There you go. So before and after, and I hope you would agree, but then you don't necessarily have to, that is looking a little bit more natural. It's a bit more luminance match here. I'm not a fan necessarily of how bright some of the trousers have gone, so I'm on the layer mask. I press B for my brush tool. We've already got black as the foreground colour. If you had any other colours in there, press D for default, and then X toggles between black and white. So I've got black as my foreground colour. I've got a brush. I want a soft brush. I want to turn the flow down and make it a little bit bigger. I'm just going to one or two gentle down there and then go switch off and on. And I'm happier with that. Things will improve as we get to the other layers. And so what the next one we're going to do is to have a look at matching colours. Right, so for colours, I've generally found that this trick with thresholds and limits and adjusting your output of your blacks and whites that we've just done for luminance actually usually does a pretty good job at matching up saturation and colour. So I don't think there's a great deal to do in colour matching. And as is always with Photoshop, there are many different ways to approach this. But today I'm going to go for a bit of an unusual one, using a reference layer again, a check layer, which will make the picture look a bit funny at first. And then we're going to use a curves adjustment layer to make our changes. So let's firstly put in our curves adjustment layer. This is going to be the one we use to actually match the colour. So I'm going to call it colour. And let's put in our check layer. So in this case, what I want is a solid colour. Oh, hang on, Mark. Don't forget to clip that. I only want it to impact the girl layer, not the whole thing. Right, solid colour adjustment layer above that. And we want this to be 50% grey, exactly 50% grey. So go 5808080. I find it's the easiest way to do it because I just tend to remember that number. But if you wanted to do it by playing around with there and finding the exact area, it should be hue 0, saturation 0, brightness 50, and then 128 across the red, green, and blue. But it's easier to type in 80, 80, 80. Okay, and I want to change this blend mode here to luminosity, which in itself is a bit counterintuitive because we're using a luminosity blend layer to make a color adjustment, but that's how this works. You can't see too much there, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to temporarily put a curves adjustment layer above that and give it some extreme curving. Right, so let's switch those two off for now. So I think what I want to do here is I think skin tone, hat could benefit from being more like the yellows that are inherent in some of the grasses. So that's going to be my main focus. The others I'm not too worried about just at the moment. So I'll switch those back on. Go down to our colour adjustment layer. There's a curves layer. Click on that. And we want individual channels. Now, we don't have yellow, do we? But blue is the opposite of yellow. So if we use a blue curves adjustment and I increase it, I'll be adding blues to the picture, and the other way, adding yellows. So what I'm looking here is I'm specifically looking around the hat and the right arm as we see it, looking forward, and here, and looking at the general brightness of some of the yellows here. Don't forget this is just a representation of the colours. It looks awful, but this is just a check layer. It allows us to kind of visualize what we're doing here. And I think somewhere around there, possibly a little bit too strong, about there. Let's see what difference that makes. I'm going to switch all three off. So before and after. It's subtle. It didn't look like it was going to be subtle because it looked horrendous, the method we're actually using to check it. But you can see now how it's a little bit warmer. The colours kind of a more complementary match to that. So I think that's kind of okay. What else do we want to do? Let's try one of the red channel, because there's a bit of red in that picture as well. Match the reds a bit more. I want to take some red out actually. No, I've got a sneaky suspicion this is looking far more easy to understand on my screen than it will by the time it hits yourselves on YouTube. So hopefully you will find that experience matches yourself. But bear with me. So before, we've now done a red adjustment as well as yellow, and after. And I'm kind of okay with that. I think that's fine. Now, the final thing we want to do in terms of colour matching, the whole gambit of colour, is the saturation. There are several approaches we can use here to match the saturation. The most obvious one that would spring to mind, it certainly did when I first thought about it, was to stick a hue and saturation layer on, clip it, and then start to play with the saturation. In fact, that's exactly what we're going to be doing, but I want a check layer in there. So this next tip is how to put a layer in there which will which allow us to see what the saturation actually looks like. So I'm going to call that saturation so that I've correctly labelled each of our adjustment layers. Above this layer, I want to put a selective colour adjustment layer, which is there. But I need to make some changes to this first. We're going to take the blacks out of every single colour channel, and then we're going to push the blacks up into the more neutral black and white. So bear with me, a little bit of time to set this up. So we're on reds, and what I want to do is I want to decrease the blacks. And I go to yellows, and I decrease the blacks. Greens, decrease the blacks. Cyan, decrease the blacks. Blues, decrease the blacks. Magenta, decrease the blacks. And then for the whites, I want to bump them up. The neutrals, bump them up. And the blacks, I want to bump them up. Now, what this has left us with is a look at saturation. So the whiter or brighter the elements of the picture, the more saturated they are. If we come down to our clipping layer, our clipped curves adjustment layer, which we hue and saturation layer, which we're using to make these adjustments, and if I play with the saturation now, you can see how that brings it down and overtly bright. So again, this is a check layer. So we're looking at the brightest areas on the background, and we're trying to match up the brightness on our go. And I think it's about too far. I'm going to boost it a little bit because there is some nice brighter bits up here. So I think it's somewhere around there. Let's take off our check layer and then take off the saturation and back on. And you can see how it's done exactly that, particularly around the hat shoulders and top. It's pulled that out. In fact, it's helped address the trousers as well. So all told, I think we've done a pretty good job so far at blending these things. Remember, there's lots of different ways to do this. I'm showing these as separate techniques so you can actually add them to your arsenal and use them as you wish. So this way we started with the girl. Looks like she's been stuck on, and that's what we've arrived at. So we're getting there. So what's left to do now is to have a look at putting a bit of a shadow in. There's not many shadows in this picture, but the light source is from right coming into the left. You can tell from the underside and left hand side of the clouds are shadowed. The top and the right hand side of the clouds are bright. So the light source is heading from kind of telegraph Polish type height coming down through the picture. So we'll bear that in mind. So we're going to take a slight interlude. The shadows we're going to put on are obviously going to be down here. There's not much canvas there to have a look at. So I'd like to just demonstrate this a little bit on a separate picture for you. So I'm going to stick a shadow on here. Here's one I prepared earlier, as it were. So all I've done there is I've cut the girl out to demonstrate this technique, and we're going to take the transform, right click and choose distort. And here I'm assuming, well, actually you can see she's brighter on the left than she's on the right, so the shadow's going to cast across our screen left to right. I'm going to distort this down, and let's say out to there, and just adjust it a little bit more, and press enter. Now what I want to do is fill that with a gradient. Now before I do that, I only want to choose the pixels that are there and not the rest of this picture, because the rest of this picture, look, has got no information in it at all. So by doing that, this little checkbox allows you to actually lock the pixels. So we're only using things where pixels actually have some information in, and we're ignoring all the transparency. So we do that. We then want to apply a gradient. So our gradient tool is over here. It's currently on a paint bucket for me, but it's G for gradient. So I'll select my gradient tool. The gradient I want is linear, a linear gradient, not a radial one, and it's the ye olde black to white. So if I now click from there to there, I've applied a gradient across the girl. Now the trick here is to change that to multiply to start to get your shadow. The next thing you want to do is bring that opacity down because it's far too bright. Incidentally, we could have changed our gradient, started halfway to make it more dark at the bottom, or took it there to fade out more. But I find just generally going from top to bottom through works. So there's a shadow. And finally, what I would do with that is I would apply a filter, apply a blur, a Gaussian blur, or Gaussian, however you pronounce it, and make it quite pronounced. I'll blur this quite a lot on there, and then lower the opacity a little bit more. And of course, and then I would actually, I'm going to stick a mask on that because the shadow wouldn't be coming in front of her feet. So B for brush, and with black as my foreground, I would just take the shadow off the top of her boots like that. Okay, now that's just to demonstrate how this actually works. You can obviously spend a lot more time with it. Other things you might want to consider are, if I was doing a real professional job and I could see a lot more texture in these, in the surround, I might even look at making that a displacement map, so the shadow would actually roll with the lines and the contours of what she's on. Clearly, if there was something bold here, let's get my brush tool, add another layer, brush, and let's say we've got, we had a brick wall which went off to that side, then it would either cut the shadow off, or depending on which way the wall went, you'd actually then see the shadow coming up. But again, you can actually use a similar technique. You can cut that, use a transform, and so on. But the essence of this was just to show you this technique of making a cutout of your subject, transforming it, multiply, blend mode, add a gradient across it. Don't forget to lock the pixels, and then blend it in. Okay, so that's the aside over. Let's get back to our picture. So during our interlude, we had a quick look at there at doing some shadows. Now, I'm going to use that same technique again here just to reinforce it, but in reality, it's not as relevant because the side light would made the shadow quite thin. It's up high, it's not going to be up very far, but we'll go through the stages just to kind of reinforce the technique, and then I want to do a little bit more work. The observant amongst you may have noticed that I now have got Untitled 2 recovered. That's because my iMac decided to freeze on me, and then, well, it crashed. So that's the first time this iMac has crashed in a year, which is not bad going. It's hardly ever switched off. So that's a good uptime. But never mind. Let's carry on. So make a copy of our girl layer, Control J. Now I'm going to work with this one because if you notice, this copy has actually inherited all our adjustments. So I don't want to bother unchecking that and such. So I'm just going to work with that one. I want to get rid of, I just want the selection. So I'm just going to get rid of the layer mask, but right click on it and say apply it. And so that effectively gives me my cutout that we were talking about before. I will Control T on the cutout. I will right click within it and choose distort, and I'll bring the shadow down. I'm assuming here that the light is off to this side, but it's slightly behind her, hence having a brighter back of hat, so it would slope forward. So I'm just going to put that there, press enter, and then while we're on this, we want to, don't forget to lock our pixels, and then we will put a gradient on. Now we recently used the gradient, so if I just click on my gradient tool, or G, we've got it's reset since the crash. It's reset to bucket, so let's go back to gradient. But other than that, we've got the same colors set. So I will now click and draw our gradient through there, and remember we now have to change that to multiply, and we'll call it shadow. And what else do we want to do? Yes, we'll blur it. So we go filter, a blur, Gaussian blur, bump that up somewhat, click OK, and lower the opacity of the layer. I'm actually going to just widen that actually. Control T on it, hold the Shift key, and I'm just going to drag it down a little bit and turn it in, just to suggest a bit of a shadow, and lower the opacity even more on it. There we are. So as I say, an unusual one. It's virtually a shadowless type picture, but notwithstanding that, we're going to try and add little bits for realism. I'm going to click on a new layer, and I'm going to call it Shadow 2. And what I want to do here is I want to put this one above our layer stack, because I want to paint on it, and I want the painting to be on the girl. So I'm firstly going to borrow the mask. So if I click on that mask, hold down my Option key or Alt key on the PC, and drag it up and drop it, I've just, now when I'm painting on this layer, I won't go outside the lines, as it were. But what am I going to paint? Well, B for my brush tool, black is my foreground colour, it's already there. Let's go for a soft brush. Let's lower the opacity, or the flow rather, down, make it a little bit wider. Change this to multiply. and I just want to brush down the outsides, add a little bit more there, possibly around there, outside the bag. That doesn't look very good yet, but if I lower the opacity on it and then switch on and off, you can see how it's added a little bit of more natural light there. So it really has reinforced now. You don't really make out the shadow unless you stare at it, but your eye notices that it's there subconsciously, and we've darkened this side, leaving it light on this side, and it kind of fits the whole lighting into place. And that is more or less our composite done. What I will do now, just to finish off, is to create a stamp layer of it all, and then in an overall adjustment. So with all those layers there, I'm on my topmost visible layer. So if I go Command Option Shift E or Control Alt Shift E, it creates a single layer which has all of these other layers in it. There we are. Now, whenever I do composite, I always tend to put a single adjustment layer over the top, curves or something like that. Today, I think I will choose a color lookup and apply a, let's have a look at soft warming. It's usually quite nice. Having said that, I don't particularly like it on this particular picture. So let's go for a, I'm going to go for a crisp, warm look. Right, now, so I rather like that. A bit too strong though. I'm going to change the blend mode to, I think we'll go for lighten, I think. Again, blend modes, which one shall I use? Well, go through them, have a look, see which one. So actually, I'm feeling no, go on, I'm going to stick with lighten. And then once I've done that, I am going to lower the opacity because I don't want it a great deal. So before and after. And it's subtle, but you can see if you look at her arms as well as the sky, for example, it is bringing that common look and feel in and helps blend the overall picture. So it's one of my composites. So the final thing I want to do, and I have a tutorial on how to make your own signature brushes. Brush tool, there you are. I hope you found that useful and that you can use some of those tools and techniques that you haven't just learned about compositing here. You've learned a bit about luminance, color, saturation, shadows, perspective, and a lot of other things which could help you in your work. And until the next one, I shall say bye-bye. Bye-bye.